Welcome to this week's episode of Practice What You Teach. Jayme, I'm happy to have you with us today.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so before we get into your topic, which I'm pretty excited to talk about, tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Jayme Yodice, and I currently own and operate a group practice here in University City, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's called the Carolina Psychology Center. So it's a small group practice, and we provide therapy and psychological testing. We also have an art therapist on staff with us, which is pretty cool. And currently, I work with adults, and I see a wide range of adults. I don't really have any particular narrow kind of areas that I focus on. I would say most of my clients are ages 30 and up, and I work with people on relationships, anxiety, perfectionism. I work with them on health-related behavior. So my degree is actually in health psychology. So I do see a large number of folks who have some chronic illnesses. In fact, right now I'm running a group for women with chronic illness. So that's an area that I'm very passionate about. And I do some psychological testing, not as much as I used to earlier in my career, but mostly therapy and a little bit of psych testing.
Yeah. So how did you come into like the health psychology side of things?
By accident. So when I was in college at Appalachian State, I could not find a major that I was really into. And for anybody listening right now who's in college and kind of frustrated, just, keep trying different classes, because I actually stumbled into intro to psych and had never had any background with psychology. And it really just lit up my brain in a way that I had not experienced before. And I was so excited about it. I marched into my advisor's office and said, I'm going to change my major to psychology. I think she wanted to throttle me because I had changed my major. This was the third time. But I was like, this time I'm really sure. And I was. And so I continued on with graduate school. And I just was fortunate to be at the university in the late 90s, in a time when health psychology was really gaining some momentum. People weren't really that familiar with it. But I had a professor there, Dr. Denise Martz, who was heading up that portion of the master's program. And I took a class with her as an undergrad, and I just fell in love. It resonated with me, the overlap between mental and physical health. And I just really loved it. I mean, I thought it was just so fascinating. And I just knew that was kind of an area where I wanted to focus. So that's how
Yeah.
that happened.
There is so much overlap. The mind and the body are like in such constant communication. And so lots of interesting ways to kind of work with it on both sides.
Yeah, it was
Well,
great.
that brings us to the question of the moment, right? Like what is, and sounds like it's probably something in the health psychology realm, but what is your go-to strategy, technique, skill, the thing that you teach the people that you work with, but that you actually use yourself?
Yeah, as soon as I started thinking about this, I kind of knew right away what it was going to be. I like to kind of think of myself as a recovering insomniac. So this has been something that I've struggled with for most of my life. And over the years, working with adults, sleep problems are very common, especially when people come into therapy. Often they've got very poor sleep. So I have really worked hard to educate myself about sleep and sleep hygiene. And then I've also been on my own journey to try to improve my sleep. So just to give a little bit of background about that, I've kind of always been a poor sleeper. So even as a young little girl, I was very shy and a little bit anxious, which is kind of interesting because I'm pretty extroverted. But that I was as a child, I was pretty sensitive. And so I just never really slept very well. And then as I grew up, I would say I had episodes of poor sleep, over time. But to fast forward in 2016, it really reached a peak. And sometimes, even when we have good things happening, it's still stressful, right? Like if we look at the stress response, sometimes we respond when something's negative, but sometimes we respond when things are positive. And at that time, I just had a lot going on. And so I think it really revved up my stress response, and that really impacted my sleep. So if you know anything about sleep issues that people have, they usually either have trouble staying asleep or they have trouble falling asleep, or both. And for a lot of people, when our mental health is impacted, it's usually going to show up as trouble staying asleep. And for me, that's definitely what I experienced. But in 2016, I started having problems with both, which was really a red flag that I was overloaded and I really needed to start addressing it. So I'm going to give you kind of the things that I've done and kind of my experiences and what's worked for me. But I do want to give a disclaimer to anybody out there listening that you really need to work with your own physician, your own therapist, whatever providers you work with, to do what is going to be right for you and to try to address any underlying medical issues or, psychological issues that you're having.
Yeah.
But this is my story a little bit. And also I've used a lot of these, we'll get into some sleep hygiene, and I do go through all of this with clients who are struggling with sleep. So in 2016, I did a sleep study because it had just kind of reached that peak, and my primary care physician said, let's get you a sleep study and rule out sleep apnea, any kind of significant sleep disorders. And so that's what we did. And what we found out is that I had insomnia, which I already knew. But I think sometimes for us and our patients that we treat, it's the validation. So being assessed and kind of finding out, yes, this is what's going on, is pretty impactful. And it also gets you to start maybe doing something about it. Mm-hmm. It kind of moves you into action, which is really what I needed to do. So you kind of start to focus on the problem and you start putting some things in place. So I kind of have been on the journey since 2016. So probably the last 6 years. And that's the other thing I kind of wanted to say to anyone listening is that, progress doesn't always look like this. Mm-hmm. We kind of do a little bit, and then we go for a while and we live our lives, and then we do a little bit, and then we go for a while. And that's kind of how it's been working on my sleep. Between the sleep doctor, which was a neurologist, my primary care, and then later on a very good therapist, we decided just to try to improve my overall sleep quality. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the focus that we took and the angle we took. So the main thing that I wanted to touch on is during that time, I did a deep dive into sleep. I started reading whatever I could about it. And I read a lot of different books and a lot of different articles, but there was one book that kind of changed everything. And I want to share it so that people will kind of know if they want to read it. It's called The Sleep Solution by Dr. Chris Winters. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I found it. I mean, I guess I was reading a lot of different things about sleep. And so this one popped up. It might have even been on Amazon. But I read it and it's wonderful. And so the main takeaway from this book that started to really change things for me is for me to work on stop worrying about my sleep or lack of sleep. So what happens for people when they don't sleep well, and especially if this goes on for a while, is they really start to get anxious about not sleeping. Yeah. And then that is what causes them to not sleep. And so it kind of goes in a vicious cycle. Yeah. So the first thing that I wanted to try to do was to break the cycle. And so I'm going to be honest, I kind of did things out of order. Like, a lot of times I try to get my patients to start with sleep hygiene, which are things like the environment, which we're going to talk about, and, how to set up your bedroom in a way that's conducive to sleep, what kind of routines to have. But I kind of started with the cognitive stress stuff first, probably because I'm a therapist. And then later I did the sleep hygiene. And so I would encourage anyone who's working on this to try to do both if they can at the same time. But it's okay. That's not the order I went in. So In the book, Dr. Winters talks a lot about, there's a lot in the media about how important sleep is, and it is important, but it really creates this panic and frenzy around getting enough sleep.
Mm.
And, you're supposed to have this many hours and it's supposed to be this way. And he really does a lot in the book to dispel some of that and to try to help people kind of, reduce down their anxiety about their sleep problems. And so one of the ways is through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, just working on how you think about sleep and how you manage the anxiety about it. And then the behavioral part are the sleep hygiene things that we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that he said, the biggest takeaway that I teach my clients is, every night I would go to bed, I would, wake up in the middle of the night, couldn't get back to sleep. I would do a variety of things to try to manage that. I might stay in the bed, I might get out of the bed and go in the other room. And then the next morning, I'm married. So the next morning I would say to my husband, I had a bad night. I would kind of give him the rundown, right? Like, this is what happened. So Dr. Winters says, stop talking about your sleep.
Okay.
Stop talking about your sleep. So right there, he starts to really work on the kind of the cognitive part, right? The self-talk that you have around sleep and changing your behavior about it so that we're not so hyper-focused on it and we start to bring down kind of our, stress response about it.
Yeah.
So I said to my husband, I'm going to try really hard from now on, no matter what kind of night I have, to just not talk about it the next morning. I'm just going to do what I always do, right? Which is I find a way to manage. I still go to work, I still do what I need to do, whether it was a good night or a bad night, but I'm going to try not to talk about it.
Yeah.
The other thing that I started doing, and I already have this skill because this is what I do with people, but I encourage people to work with a therapist on how to learn how to do this skill, which is just some self-talk. And so at night, if I woke up and I was having trouble getting back to sleep, I would just start working on my self-talk. So I would say things like, it's okay. You're having trouble falling asleep.
Mm-hmm.
I would say things like, I'm just going to rest my body right now.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing he really addresses in the book is that it's okay just to rest, even if you're not asleep. And sometimes we think we're not asleep, but we're actually in light sleep.
Yeah.
It's okay just to relax your body. That's just as important sometimes as actually being asleep. So all of this really soothing self-talk and kind of saying it's okay is to work on reducing down that anxiety about being awake in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe even saying some things like, I might be tired tomorrow, but I know what to do about that. I can have a little bit of coffee, or I can take a break midday. I can take a nap even if I need to. And so really trying to bring it down. That really started to help me break that vicious cycle that I think I was in.
Yeah, it seems like really turning up the volume on like self-compassion there and like really like giving a lot of kindness rather than kind of like shaming self-talk. Yeah, just really giving yourself the grace that seems like it made a big difference.
It did. It's challenging. And, when I have people come in for therapy, a lot of times people get referred to me from a physician because they're having trouble sleeping. So they refer them in for therapy. And I know how distressing it is when it's been going on for a long period of time. It is very painful. It is painful to feel like you're in a fog during the day. So even though you're functioning, maybe you're not feeling like you're functioning at your highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty painful experience for people.
Sure.
So it's challenging, but it really does start to help to be able to give yourself a lot of kindness around it. And just to kind of drive home the concept of, I'm not going to die because I'm not sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to the hype in the media and everything we read about how critical it is that we sleep, that kind of stuff really heightens that anxiety around it if you're having trouble.
Mhm.
So that was the first thing that I did. And then what I did with the sleep hygiene is I dabbled, like I would do a little something, and then I would wait, and then I would do a little something else. And so you name it, I probably tried everything that there is. But I thought I would just say what worked for me. And again, I encourage anyone to experiment, and try lots of different things. But there are some standard things that any sleep expert will tell you is probably pretty important when it comes to sleep hygiene. So the first thing is the environment. And so you want your bedroom and where you sleep to be a place you want to be and where you feel comfortable. And this could be down to like what kind of sheets you have, what kind of pillow you have, what the room looks like. Is it a soothing place to be? It should be a place where you're sleeping and having sex only. So you want to try to get the TVs out of the room. You want to try to kind of not be in there unless I would add relaxing. Sometimes I do go in my bedroom just to lay down and kind of relax, but you want it to be that kind of environment.
Yeah.
You want it to be very dark. And this was something that I had never really thought about, but I realized over the years, I'm a very light sleeper. So any little amount of light or noise is going to wake me up. And then even if I'm not anxious or ruminating, I'm just going to be awake. It's going to be harder for me to get back to sleep. So I bought blackout curtains. And so then now I have a ritual where when we go up at night to get ready for bed, I close those curtains. And that sends that signal to your brain, right, that we're getting ready to go to sleep. And then in the morning, I open them up and I let the light into the bedroom. And so that's kind of like creating these rituals around going to bed and waking up is also pretty important. But I mean, a lot of the experts say it needs to be so dark that you can't even see your hand in front of your face, like in the room.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even, I know I realized just recently how much light our like alarm clock was giving off. And so sometimes it's even those like subtle things that you don't even think there's no way I can't read with that light. There's no way it's giving off enough, but it makes a difference.
A lot. Yeah. I mean, and I would say if you're someone that sleeps great, then don't worry about any of this stuff, right? But if you have trouble sleeping, these are the things definitely to do. And so you want it to be dark, you want it to be comfortable, you want it to be cool. And so now I've worked with an integrative doctor, my primary care, and my therapist, and then of course this book that I love. And so you're going to hear anything from 65 to 68 degrees in terms of the ideal temperature in the room. So I've tried them all, and we've settled at 68. At 66, we were, shivering even with blankets. I'm like, okay, well, this clearly is not the point of this, right? The point is to be comfortable. The 68 is kind of where we settled out in terms of comfort. And then the other thing is that in terms of noise, and being sensitive to noise. So many years ago, I tried white noise machines, and many therapists have these in our offices to kind of drown out, other sounds. And those did not work for me. And so again, there's some kind of sensory sensitivity that I have where my brain just picks up a sound sometimes, and it just focuses in on that, and it becomes annoying. Sure. And so I tried lots of different things, and I finally just threw my hands up and got rid of that. But I found something this summer by accident that works great that I thought people could try out. So it was the summer. It's, in Charlotte, it's like 100 degrees outside. It's very hot. Also, I was going through menopause, so I was having hot flashes. So we said, let's put a fan next to the bed. And so we have this old box fan. I'm talking very cheap, box fan, nothing fancy. Put it next to the bed to give me some airflow at night, which was great. And I haven't slept without it since. It's been wonderful.
Yes, I cannot sleep without the box fan.
Okay, another box fan. Part of the fun. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I don't know. It's so funny. I don't know if it's just more of a natural sound, than white noise, but it's great. And I think the other thing, and I'm not going to get in the weeds on this because we're going to try to keep it short, but if you like to read, I encourage anyone to read the book, because Dr. Winters also he goes into these rituals and how helpful they are, but how also to work on overall quality of sleep so that when you travel and you do other things, you don't have to have these things.
Yes.
Right? Like, you don't have to create such an elaborate ritual that if you don't have the things, you're going to panic and not be able to go to sleep. Right. So that's a tricky balance. But because we sleep, most of the time I'm in my bed, in my room, I'm going to sleep with that fan.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think the fan would meet the size requirements for a carry-on item. So when you do travel, like what are some of your go-to things when you do have to be out of the house?
Yeah. So the honest answer is I used to really panic when we would travel, because when I was at the height of the insomnia, travel was a real problem. And so sometimes in the last 6-7 years, I have had medication to take. And so again, you need to work with a medical provider for yourself. But the way I used it, the intention was to help in times when I really might be struggling, to try to anticipate that time and to use it, or to use it to break a really bad episode of insomnia. So let's say it's been 2 nights, 3 nights, 4 nights, and I haven't been able to sleep, then the medicine helps to break that cycle. And some people have to use medicine for, a long period of time, and sometimes they don't. And I haven't had to use it in the past maybe year, because I've really just kind of diligently worked on lots of different things with the sleep quality. And now when we travel, I don't have any noise. I don't have the blackout curtains, and I sleep pretty well, which is major.
That is great.
A major win. And even sometimes I can't believe it. And, sometimes I'll notice that a little bit of that anxiety creeps back in, when we're headed somewhere. And I think, but that's starting to go away the more confident I get.
Yeah.
And the more I practice the skill of, if I have a bad night, I have a bad night. It's okay. Yeah. Most people don't sleep through the night every night, forever and always. That's not really the way it goes. So it's been less of an issue. But I would say if I do have trouble, I'm going to do the self-talk. I've also tried meditation, and it's interesting. I love meditation. I use it during the day. Doesn't work so great for me at night. And again, and this is what I say to clients, it's okay. You're going to read about how this should help and this should help, but it's up to you to experiment and figure out what are the combination of things that work well for you. It's something again about the sound and just getting hooked in on the voice, and then I can't do what I'm trying to do with it.
Yeah.
But there are great meditation apps out there for sleep, and I would encourage anybody again to try it.
Yeah. And I think too, it's also important to know that like sometimes what works changes over time. And so just because something worked for a while and all of a sudden it's not working doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. It just means it's time to change it up. And so, a lot of those sleep hygiene habits are helpful things. Certainly, I know the box fan has been my best friend for 8 years now. It's been a long time, and I don't know what I would do without it. And the routine is really helpful, right? Kind of that winding down and your body kind of being like, oh, okay, we're getting ready. It's almost time. Okay. But if people want to learn more about maybe some of the other sleep hygiene habits, or just to get ideas of what some might look like, I'll definitely link the book below so people can find that book. Are there any other resources that you suggest for people to maybe kind of like learn, get maybe a quick education on like what some of those other habits might be?
I would definitely look at the book, and then it's pretty easy. I don't have a specific resource online that I use. I mean, when people come in to work with me and we're working on sleep with therapy, I usually first of all, I ask my clients, do you like to read? This would be for anything, not just this book. Do you like to read? And if they say yes, I'm like, yes, okay, because you can get so much more out of the process thing, in between sessions and whatnot. So I'll definitely have them read the book. If they cannot, or if they don't like to read, I say, cool, that's fine. And then I try to kind of condense down, even have a couple little handouts that I use. But I would start with just basic sleep hygiene. But the other thing that I would do is if your sleep problems are really troubling you, or they've been going on for a long time, or they're getting more severe, you really want to start with your primary care physician. And you also want to consider working with a therapist. So again, I felt like the last couple of years, I had like a little team, so I had a primary care to look at the medical part. I had a therapist to help me with stress and anxiety. And then I did have, for just a minute or, not long, integrative doctor who we did a deep dive in my blood work, and we added in some supplements. But you just want to make sure you're getting kind of, the basic medical care and blood work done, because you want to rule out like a vitamin D deficiency. You want to look at your diet. There are some foods and little snacks you can try at night that are they have melatonin, or they're melatonin producing, or magnesium, like a small handful of nuts and some dried fruit sometimes is good. And you want to start doing some of those lifestyle things. And if that's really not getting at it, then you want to kind of, again, try to get some outside help and support. But I would definitely start with the basics in terms of, the environment, and pick up the sleep solution.
Yes.
Because there's so much good stuff in it. And if the beginning of it is a lot about the science behind sleep, if you feel like that's going to bog you down, skim through that and get to the sections that are talking about the solutions, because it's really worthwhile. And he's very humorous, and it's just written in it's written in a way, I think, that's easy for people to read and really absorb the information.
Sure. So if people want to get connected with you and maybe learn more about sleep from you as an expert, how can I find you?
So you can either go to our website, which is carolinapsychologycenter.com, and you can send an email through that, or my email is very simple. It's just my name, Jayme Yodice, at carolinapsychologycenter.com. Send me an email and we'll work on sleep. I love to do it. Love to work on it.
I'll put your website and your email down in the video description too, so people can find you easily. Thank you so much for talking today about sleep. It's something that I think so many people struggle with, and sleep hygiene habits, they can be, some of those small things can be little steps that we can take, but each one of those little steps can make a big difference. So thank you for sharing today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. If you want to learn more or check out other episodes, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.